Good afternoon. Thanks everybody for attending this afternoon. We're going to spend some time running through one of the, no pun intended, key new features of AVAIL Desktop 4.3, what we call key cards. So thanks for joining us. My name is Randall Stevens. I am the CEO of AVAIL. Still heavily involved in the product, so I end up being the ones usually delivering these to talk about, how and why we develop some of these features. And I'm being joined by Todd Trevisano, who runs our customer success team here at AVAIL. Todd will be here to help wrangle if you've got any questions behind the scenes as we're talking through this. Feel free to put those through the chat or Q&A on the back end, and then we should have plenty of time this afternoon to try to answer those questions for you. But I'm going to spend I always start by telling people it's like I'm going to run you through a few slides just to kind of set this all up, but then we'll jump right into the software and I'll give you a demo and show you how easy it is to start to take advantage of these key cards. So for those of you that are new to AVAIL, I always like to kind of kick these things off with really what our mission and goal is, and I'll try to relate as we talk about what we're doing specifically with these features, how it kind of ties into this from a strategic and initiative kind of standpoint. But ultimately, our goal with AVAIL is to help you see and retrieve information with ease. Highlight the word see and retrieve. Obviously, a lot of this is about search and finding and browsing, and a lot of browsing, especially in this industry, is about seeing. So there's still a lot of emphasis towards the visuals. As I run you through what we're doing with these key cards, you'll see very quickly that this is a big part of that. How do we make content more accessible and easy for people to find and see and use? We also, besides, accessing the content and various types of content, have put a lot of efforts. In fact, one of the new features of 4.3 is also what we call dynamic paths. And that's all about letting our customers store and our ability to support the storage of wherever that content is, wherever that content resides. And ultimately, our goal is that through the AVAIL interface, you've got a single interface to be able to see this information and get back to it, no matter where that content lives. This slide is one that I've been testing out, but I'll kind of run you through it because I think it's helpful to start to understand how we're thinking about the problems that we're tackling and how you can then think about the features that we're developing in AVAIL kind of fit into this paradigm. But our premise is that there's a lot of information that you're using every day in this industry we like to say it's trapped. It's trapped in these file systems. We all can agree that storing files in file folders becomes very cumbersome, especially as things scale. It's very difficult to find that information inside these file systems. But what isn't necessarily as apparent until you start talking about it in this way is, information is also trapped in the files themselves. So a lot of the work that we've done around our harvest utilities, around Revit, or that recognition that there's data that lives inside of, not just the file systems, the files themselves, but inside the files. And it's very cumbersome interfaces to get to that information. So a lot of the work that we've been doing is how can we use AVAIL to not only see files and get to the information on our file systems, but to also do that to get information that lives inside of these files themselves. So Revit container libraries, warehouse files are a great example of that. You're forced to have to store that data in an RVT file, typically very cumbersome to manage and to get to. And we've been doing a lot of work about applying the core principles about what we're doing with AVAIL to these problems. And then, lastly, the applications themselves. Revit, obviously, we put a lot of attention on this, but we can probably all recognize that as a project grows and you're trying to work inside the Revit project browser that's inside that application, that's another example where there's just a lot of information that's in there, and you're forced to use the interface that's been provided to do that. But we're working on ways to be able to abstract that. So this is the part of the drawing that I've been trying to experiment with to be able to tell this story. But, if you believe what I just said, which is there's kind of these core places where information's trapped, and the interfaces to getting to it are limited, either Windows File Explorer in the case of a file system, or using Revit to try to open up and see or browse the data that's inside of an RVT file for a container warehouse, or the project itself, are typical examples. So the way we've been working on these core tools of AVAIL, Revit being the first kind of application problem to point these tools at, is to take and abstract that information. If we can touch the information in all these different places, we use the word virtualize quite a bit, but basically index it, virtualize it, know where that data lives, but then free that information up in new ways inside the AVAIL interface. So, we talk about context a lot, that, things, when you look at what we're doing with channels, that's just a way of adding context to the information that's sitting out there in one of these various places. We've been working on this concept of workspaces, around your project, and archival. That's all, again, kind of a layer of adding context so that the information, either what project it's related to or what kind of content it is, through the way that it's being organized in AVAIL through these channels. And then ultimately there's tons of features, right, that we've been building. We're going to go through these key cards today. And I've got on this slide, call this is kind of the workflow layer of tools that now let you do new things with that content. But you can also think about specifically with features like what we're going to talk about today with these key cards, that's really just a presentation layer. So the data lives in the file systems and in the files themselves and these applications that we're using, and that's where the data is being produced. And if you've got good structured data around your content, our goal with AVAIL is to let the interface layer for that kind of come alive in new ways. And I think that'll be very clear today as we run through what we're doing with these key cards. For those of you that are relatively new to AVAIL, or are a customer of AVAIL and using it only for managing your Revit libraries, from the get-go, we've designed this to be completely content agnostic. So we're taking the very same principles and applying this to lots of different content types. And the same problem, is not just basically with the file system of getting to these files, but there's lots of data trapped in lots of different files with cumbersome interfaces to get to it. So we're applying these same principles. And then not only being agnostic to what kind of content, but again, where that content's being hosted, more and more, tougher and tougher, I'll say, kind of concepts to understand, or for users to understand, cloud versus on-prem, and all the different myriad places that information and data can live, is making this a much more complicated issue for people to know where content is. So AVAIL, once connected to all this, makes the kind of where go away, that the user just has to know if they can find it and drag and drop it out of AVAIL into the application of choice. And that's all they should need to know. So we're trying to, you could think about that as reducing the complexity of what it means, the complexity that's added when information's in different places, different kinds of information. Can we boil this down and to make it simple to see, find, and ultimately use without having to know all these different locations that are in use within your operations. All right, so we released this 4.3 version of the AVAIL desktop, I think about 3 weeks ago, right before Autodesk University. So hopefully a lot of you have already downloaded it, started putting it to use. It was in beta for a couple of months before that, what we call preview release, but it's now in production, commercial availability. So several features, I'll just show you the kind of highlights, the features that were in this release. Key cards is what we're going to spend the time on today to kind of take a deeper dive understanding of. There's also a feature that I'll show you related to this. It's like a breadcrumb trail for address of where you are as you're navigating this content. I mentioned that we added a feature called dynamic paths, which has to do with resolving usually cloud hosted content that is caching locally on people's machines. We have a feature called dynamic paths. We'll be doing another webinar later this year specifically on the dynamic paths, but that is available in the 4.3 desktop. We did some improvements to notifications. Todd can attest that, great from the help desk standpoint, that we've got just better information flowing through, that when something's processing or when a job's going on, that there's just better information about how far along it is, progress bars, the kind of notification system. You'll see when I'm demoing this, when changes have been made, the application will now tell you you need to refresh your display to see the new information. So seem like trivial things, but they're the things that make a big impact as you're using the application every day. And then we also, another feature, we have just, I'll just say we're putting our toe in the water on bringing you manufacturer content. So we've launched what we call the AVAIL Select channels in the marketplace. That's available to our enterprise customers. They should see that in the marketplace. It's broken up into architectural and MEP. We are going to be doing, I think, Todd, the call. I think we've got another webinar next week, maybe, that we're doing on that. So hopefully some of you will join in and learn more about what we're doing on that front. But today we're going to focus on this key cards feature, which is the most visual. It's probably the most exciting, just from that standpoint. And hopefully, as you'll see, it's very easy to implement and take advantage of. So hopefully you all can dive in and start taking full advantage of it. So key cards, for those of you that have been using the AVAIL desktop, all right, for the last year and a half, we introduced a concept we call channel cards, which were basically just visuals on the front end of channels, so that you could customize those and make them look, customize them to your firm's branding and preference to help people get to that information. So key cards are comparable in that they're a visual kind of front end. What's different about it is key cards operate inside of a channel. So when you've got content inside of a channel, the other piece of this that's important to understand is that these are all data driven. So if you get good data on your content, the key cards get automatically generated, and they're a way of, think of them as like groupings based on the tags, the values of tags that you've assigned to content. So it'll make more sense when I dive in here and show you what this looks like. And those key cards can be as simple as text on colored backgrounds, but you can also load your own graphics and customize these to your heart's content. So they're very customizable. You can make it feel like your own and the way that you want that to be presented inside of your own operation. And then they're also what we call stackable, in that you're not limited to one layer of these. You can actually, I refer to them as gateways through to your content. So you can think about stacking those gates, and as you move through those gates, you're kind of narrowing down what you're looking at and what the content is. All right, so just a couple of screen grabs to get you oriented to how this works. But typically a channel, in this case of some Revit content, would sit in a channel of AVAIL. It's obviously searchable, and down at the bottom you've got your filters panel with a lot of structured, hopefully structured data, and this key value pairs of data. So the structured part of this is what's key, no pun intended, to making the key cards work. They're called key cards because they're driven off these keys. So in this case, I've got discipline and a bunch of values. I've got Revit category and a bunch of values, and so forth and so on. So you can elevate, basically you can think about what key cards are doing, and that's elevating any of these values, keys, up into the interface and making that basically a grouping of that content, so that you're not just seeing all the content, what we would call loose content in your channel. So there, I'm highlighting, there's discipline, which was, that's not data that came out of the files themselves. We had to do some work to decide, what's structural content versus architectural. The nice thing, with as you tag this content, is sometimes you can have the same piece of content can be both architectural and electrical. I always use, lighting fixtures are a great example of that. They're both an architectural element, but they're also electrical elements. So the same piece of content can be tagged as two different disciplines, and you can get to it in two different ways in that example. And then ultimately things like Revit category, which is data coming out of the files themselves, driving this, that data into AVAIL. So key cards get to take advantage of that. So the end result is you come into a channel, and instead of seeing all of that content, this is an example where the discipline was elevated as a set of key cards in front, and obviously some work done to customize those graphics to make it visually appealing. But now when your users come into this channel, instead of just being faced with all of that content and data and having to start a search, they can actually have, what we would consider a much more pleasant experience, visual experience for double clicking and navigating through this. So if I click into one of those, you can then within the channel, this is where I say it's stackable. So in that case, I started with discipline, but I can have another layer down that once I click in, I'm then using Revit category in this example to drive sets of key cards. And again, you can customize all these graphics. I'll show you, we're actually giving you a bunch of these graphics that we've created so that you don't have to do them from scratch, but we've also given you some templates that you can make it easier for you to go and create your own. And then once you're in a channel, you also have the ability, that last was what we call grid mode, but there's also what we call banner mode. So you can actually even stack further. And when you're looking at the content, have a set of filters that show up at the top. So in reality, what we've done is we're taking the data that lives in your filters panel, and at your choosing, you can decide to elevate that up into this visual kind of gates or front end that's much more visual for your users to use to navigate through this content by putting it up in this presentation layer, what we would consider the presentation layer of the software. But I'll keep emphasizing, you don't manually do any of that. It's all driven off the data. So once you've got good data on your content, as I'll show you this, you kind of get this for free. So it doesn't require a whole lot of work to put it to good use. So the key card editor is a new lens. So if you've been used to using our new Tag.io lens over here on the right, if you're an editor to a channel, you'll see a new key card editor show up right here, just below your Tag.io icon. And that's available to editors. It's basically a tool that lets you design the way you want your key cards inside of that channel. And you can do this on a channel by channel basis. So it's a per channel setup of how you want your data to be presented inside that channel. This is what that key card editor ends up looking like. Again, it's part of what we call our new lens architecture. It's a plugin architecture to AVAIL. I'll keep talking about that because that's an important piece of what we're doing to the application moving forward. It's making it much quicker and easier for us to develop these kinds of tools on top of the core of AVAIL through this plugin or lens architecture that we've been developing. So this is another example of those lenses. This is actually web technology that's doing this. In fact, this key card editor is actually a server-side web service that's doing this. The benefits of that, I probably don't have to explain, is that if we're making updates or changes to this, it doesn't require you to install any new software. So we're bridging that gap between what has to run or needs to run on the desktop from application software and what can be delivered server side, and how to make those two worlds come together very seamlessly. So this key card editor, I'll run through this and show you in the live application, but there's basically, at your choosing, you decide what keys you want to present. You can see here that I've added 4 different keys to this particular channel. You can then bring those keys in, and then as you select those keys in the center, you'll see the values flip up and be available. And then you can decide on the right how to customize those graphics. And you can, again, either leave it as text, pure text, change background colors, positioning of the text, but you can also load background images, which is what we've done here, and customize them to your, to as much as you want to customize them. So I saw that Q&A was lighting up a little bit. Todd, is there anything we want to stop before I go to the demo?
A couple of the questions I was able to answer just directly. And let's see here, one just came in. I'm looking through right now about key card, the search line, for example. If I want to search for seating, I would search for multiple partial name, like, yeah, I'm not sure.
What was the question?
Basically, I'll read it out. I'll read it out loud. Yeah, about. I'm trying to process at the same time. Sorry. Can key cards contain the search line? For example, if I want to search for seating without pre-tagging, I would search for multiple partial names like chair, bench, stool, etc.
Well, the key cards exist grouping something based on the values that have been assigned to content. So if you wanted to tag something as bench and make that your own Revit category, for example, call it Revit category as a key with a new value of bench, yes, that will elevate up and be its own bench key card at that point, which then basically is executing a search on anything that's tagged bench. So from that standpoint, yes, you can customize this to your heart's content. That's what's really nice about it. And if you think about taking tag IO and the speed with which you can take all this data into a spreadsheet, you can create your own keys and pump data into that back into the system and then use that to drive this visual front end. You can do a lot of exciting things pretty quickly. All right, I'm in the desktop software now. I'll go full screen so that you guys can see this. So I'll just show you a couple of examples of end results, and then we'll go. I'll show you. We'll customize some things. So as most of you know, in the marketplace, if you go, we have the out of the box channels. So if you go look at those out of the box channels and have 4.3, you'll notice that now we've implemented those key cards as part of that channel. The other nice thing about this that I should mention is, you can add key card information to your channels while key cards, it's backwardly compatible. In other words, if you're still using old versions of the desktop, it's not going to mess up any of your experience of the way people always experienced your data in that channel. But if you get the new 4.3 desktop, all of a sudden it'll come to life in this new way. So this is the example of where we put discipline in front of that content. And then if I double click on any one of those, this is why I think of it as a gate. It's like I'm basically executing a search on whatever that value was. And now I'm looking at key cards that are being represented by the Revit category of that content. So if I want to go into, electrical equipment, here's a piece of electrical equipment. And up here on the top, this is what we refer to as a breadcrumb. So you may be used to this in like websites where you can kind of see your navigation. So I can go back and forth now that I'm going through these gates. I can use this breadcrumb trail to kind of navigate backwards and forwards through this information. So if I click in and I've got other things, I can use this to filter by. And ultimately, if I double click on one of those, I'm executing the search and then can, further use the filters panel and all that information to get back to content. So it's that easy to navigate for your end users. I think it'll be very natural for them as you implement this to see that. But if I go into a channel where I have editing privileges, so I'm just going to go into another channel of Revit content. So I've already got key cards in front of this driven by the Revit categories. One thing to note in the interface is if you go up to where the options are, you can actually in your channel hide key cards. And that is not a publishing feature. That is each user can decide to turn those off or turn those back on. So the way to think about it, and the reason we did that is because if users have already gotten used to using the filters panel and like that navigation style, they can on a per channel basis just turn off those cards and continue working the way they work. But as the publisher, curator of the channel, you can set those up. That's the default experience that you send out until a user says, hey, turn those off. They're not helping me. I can get to the content faster without them. And that is what we would call persistence. So each user, as they would hide that, is off for that channel until they've turned it back on. So that can probably be a little bit confusing when you first start using it, because you may think that this is your editing tool for for whether or not the cards are being visible to everybody or not, but it's really on a per user basis, whether you want to see them or not. I was actually on a call earlier today with somebody who said, the key cards are nice, but when I put them in front, it makes it harder for me to manage the content. And I was like, well, there's a feature up there, just turn them off. And then if you're used to using the filters panel to quickly navigate and filter out your content while you're doing maintenance on it, just turn those off. That you're not forced to go there. You want to see all the data, and especially in the filters panel, as much as possible. So that's just one thing to watch out for when you first start using it. But here, the end result is here, obviously I've got these categories. And again, if I go into like lighting fixtures, what we're seeing is the content, and then this is what we call banner mode. So we're seeing actually another set of key cards being elevated, but being presented in what we call banner mode. So here I can now use these as quick filters inside of this. If I'm just looking for connectors or I'm looking for lighting, I can filter through that content. And if you look down below, it makes, you'll start to understand what this is doing. We're basically taking what you normally would have clicked on for filters, elevating those into this kind of visual presentation layer. So we think it's, we've already gotten a lot of positive feedback from people that have already started implementing this. It'll make obviously your channels kind of come to life in a whole new way. And if I go into this channel though, I'm going to go launch that key card editor. What you're going to see is that it'll load these resources up. I think there they come. And you can see that I can just click on these keywords, but it's very easy. If I wanted to add another key, let's say that I wanted to organize and look at this by, Omniclass title, which is data that's coming off of my content. There's all my Omniclass titles, right, that came in from the metadata out of my files, right, on top of my families. And if I select these, I can edit these one at a time. If I wanted to change say the text positioning, so we've got some really just simple, basic text editing tools to make this, kind of out of the box easy. I could change my background color if I wanted to something that, maybe match my firm standards of the way I wanted to look. But I can also, load up an image. And in this case, I'm just going to pick something, but I can load any image that I wanted to, and then I can change the text color to make it stand out on top of that. I can, arrange that text to be now at the top instead of the bottom. So you kind of get the gist of that it's very highly customizable. You can also, though, do this in bulk. So I can multi-select these and affect them all at once. So if I want to change that background color of all of them, this editor lets you do that. So this is why I say it's real quick and easy to do some basic. If I wanted to assign a custom image to each one of these, it actually seems like a lot, but I can tell you I did like, those 50 or 60 Revit categories. And once I had the images that went with each of them, it was like 10 minutes to actually just go pick those and assign them. So it wasn't a monumental task to actually customize those. But I can, I can also arrange this that if I wanted that to be the first gate that I went through, all I do is drag that up. We call this the flow. It is the flow through the channel. So in this case, I'm going to start with Omniclass title, then present Revit category or keyword. And then all I have to do is say publish. And this quickly, all of that now is going to, because I loaded that image. This may take a second. But this will publish that right back to the channel. I obviously grabbed one with a lot of data, but any other questions while I'm waiting on that? I should have done something with fewer.
It was a frenzy of activity in the Q&A. So while that's going, yeah, I can ask a couple of them that have come through kind of, let's say, maybe opinion questions like, would you place all your Revit family versions, into a single channel and then use key cards, or do you think it's better to break those out into different channels? So I don't know if you have any thoughts on.
Yeah, I think, in the example that we used here where we put discipline out front, that's a great example where like if you've got structural engineers, as part of your team, and all they're looking at every day is the structural information, it probably makes sense to put that out into its own channel. I'm going to stop this. I think I might have. Let's see if that'll update. You know, that it, to me, the decisions about whether you're going to, whether something should be in its own channel or not, or all part of one channel, to me, the decision-making process is, are the people who are going to be accessing it ever, or what frequency do they need the other information that's in that channel? So you can think about that as the thought process is, am I making people wade through a bunch of information that they could care less about to get to what they care about every day? So if it rises to that occasion, in that example, like somebody who's doing structural work could care less about all that architectural content. So in that case, it might make sense to say, why am I going to make you click on that to get to the stuff that you need to get to every day, to bypass all the stuff that you could care less about? It probably makes sense to at least have a copy of that content over into a channel that's specifically for the structural, say, group. Within the channel, then I think it's a question of, I think the one, you can have a lot more various content and use these key cards in front of a wider variety of content in the channel. And then it makes sense that if it's, hey, the people that are trying to get to this content sometimes need to get to that, sometimes need to get to that, then at least you've presented that in one interface for them. They know that it's there. It's they become very accustomed to going through one gate or the other gate to get to that information. So, so I'm going to close this, and let's see if I refresh this channel. So now what I should get is my Omni class. I think I did not. Let me publish this again. I'm not getting a very good demo today. All right, so I'm going to publish that. All right, so there my changes have now been published. And when I go back, here's the example of our notifications telling me I need to refresh that channel. So clicking that will refresh the channel for me. And now, instead of looking at Revit category, I'm looking at Omniclass data in front. So now if I went to kitchen casework, I put Revit category next. That probably wouldn't make sense in this case, but there's casework. And then the third level was, you know, the sub classification that have been, you know, keywords that have been tagged on that, wall cabinets versus tall cabinets. But it was that easy for me to make the change. I decide I don't like that. I go back to the key card editor. I can say, I'm going to just get rid of the Omniclass data, republish this. It's that quick and easy. And now I've completely changed that experience for the way I'm able to view and navigate that channel. So you know, don't be afraid to, you know, again, if you've got good data in here, you know, concentrate on your data. What this is going to force you to do is concentrate on, do we have good data on our content or not? And you can use Tag.io as a tool if you haven't been using that to double check all of that, and then let this stuff will just work. So it's that easy. And again, you know, I've been using Revit as the example, but if I went into my, let's use like, where's my photos? Materials, you know, materials are a great example. Here's a textures collection. There I've elevated, if I look at the key card editor, I took the category that I had these materials in, elevated them. Instead of a gate, you know, I could put those in grid view. But in this case, I just wanted to make them show up across the top as the category. And ultimately that lets me, you know, filter out very quickly to masonry. And if I double click, I'll go into the next layer down, and I'm looking for soldier course or travertine, or, you know, whatever other, you know, sub tagging or categorization that you've got to your content. So really quick and easy once you start seeing this in place to now navigate. It's less overwhelming by elevating these than it is to look at all that data in the filters panel. So hopefully you'll find this very useful. Just one other quick thing, and then we'll turn back and answer some questions. We've updated the installers channel, which is available in the marketplace to subscribe to. We're now calling that the AVAIL installers and publisher resources. And again, if you now go into that channel and you've got 4.3, you'll see that we're using the key cards in front of all this information. So your installers are still there. It's now broken up between the desktop or the browser installer packages. And there you can see we've elevated again that searching and filtering. But if you go look, we've also added key cards. And within there, here are those Revit categories. So we basically, all of those images that I was showing you that we use to customize those Revit categories, we're handing you those images so you can apply those and use them yourself so you don't have to remake them. We zipped all those up so you can just download the zip file and start to use those. We also, though, gave you we just set those up in a PowerPoint template and created all the graphics, spit those images out of PowerPoint as JPEGs or as JPEGs in this example. And then that became our template for just spitting out and customizing these graphics. So we gave you the PowerPoint template. So if you want to go and edit any of those and add your own graphic, that's already kind of set up in that template, at least in this style. But you can go, create. I've already seen some of our customers doing some amazing work already. Just find somebody that's got some good graphic skills in your organization and show them how this works, and they'll go create a bunch of great images for you. But we've also, I'll go back and show you in a second the manufacturer data in those AVAIL select channels, but we basically organized that data by Omniclass, so level 1 and level 2 Omniclass. So we've already got key cards made for those that you're welcome to grab out of here if that's one that you want to use, including the template. There's Omniclass level 1. Here's Omniclass level 2 data and images. It's not going to be the entire Omniclass, so we're kind of doing those as we go, as we needed them for the content that's flowing into the manufacturer channel. And then we've done, here are those disciplines that I was showing you. Again, you can make up your own, use those to kind of quickly get started. And then we did some fun things. If any of you have been using any of the AI text to image generation, we used Midjourney to actually make Midjourney versions of all those Revit categories to see what the Midjourney how they would interpret these different. So that was just kind of a fun thing that we did, but we put these up here for you to be able to see. If I go back to that channel, I'll show you what that ends up looking like. So I've got a completely different channel, same content as that other Revit, but I created just using tag.io. I just copied Revit category and created a new key called Revit key card, Midjourney key card category. And then I was able to assign these key cards and have a completely different setup or look to that. But this was just kind of a fun thing that we did. We're actually going to start encouraging people to share the kinds of things they've done, and hopefully people will be able to start sharing kind of the creativity they've got around how they're organizing and making nice visuals for all these things. So this was kind of a neat, fun thing to do. But you can customize to your heart's content. Anything I'm not thinking about that I didn't cover, Todd, that you can think of?
I had a couple questions you could speak to. One is just on key cards and how you're showing them here in the desktop, and if there's any plans to introduce those over to the AVAIL browser for Revit.
Great question. So you're catching us right in the middle of a transition. In fact, with the 4.3 desktop release, we also released into what we call preview mode or beta, a new version of the Revit add-in. It's actually the Revit, the AVAIL browser for Revit. It's actually version 5 that's in beta. And then we also released, we just released an update to our Harvest utility that includes materials support. Both of those are available in the preview section. You can download and begin using those. So we actually are supporting through Harvest Revit materials now. To specifically answer your question, we are moving away from the visual browser inside of those of the browser, the plugin that's inside of the apps. This is in beta right now. We're not deprecating what you've got, but the move is to make this desktop the primary way for seeing, because of features like this. They would not work very well in a compressed interface like and flex interface I'd claim like lives in those browsers right now. So the move afoot is I could actually show you because I'm running it. If I run Revit in a Revit project right now. I've actually got the AVAIL, the new AVAIL browser add-in here. But if I want to bring, say, a family that I'm browsing, out of this desktop, say a piece of casework into this project, all I do is drag and drop from this interface. And what we're going to see is this is now what that browser will do. It'll pop up and show me the types, information that I can bulk load. I can do all of those types of things, but I can also just now drag a specific type into the project. So we're moving away from the actual browsing of that. Where what's not finished is we're actually adding new search capabilities back in this front end in the application layer, and that is going to launch the desktop with the searches that you execute there. So I said you're catching us in the middle of a transition. Key cards were the first thing that's getting set up here. We're now doing some work on the way that these plugins from the different applications know where you're searching from and how that affects what's going on in search. But the other one thing that I didn't note was that when you are running 4.3 now, if I hit close, it actually doesn't close the app. It's actually still running as a service. You'll see it down here in your tray. And part of that is snappiness. When you now are going to execute searches from an application like Revit, that'll pop up immediately on your desktop and show you the results of that. And you can just start dragging and dropping back into your application. So for some people, it will be a change in workflow. But for everybody that has started using this, Todd can attest, we've been getting good positive feedback on the improvements to the flow. For those of you that have never implemented it, you're not going to retrain anybody. It's getting really, really simple. This was a process we called inverting the flow of getting data into Revit. So instead of having a desktop and having to select something and then seeing data, we're moving much more towards find it, drag and drop it. If there's something else to ask, we'll pop that window up. And so we're trying to make it much simpler for the end users to be able to get this stuff into their project. So Todd, next question.
Yeah, and so just to, well, I guess, yeah, clarify that the plugin, there'll still be a plugin in Revit, but that's not what, needs to be, kept open there in a side panel in Revit any longer. You'll be able to just
close it, and then when you drag something, it'll open it when needed. So here's an example, like if I've got a material library and I want to bring this material, all I have to do is drag and drop it onto Revit, and it'll actually pop this window up, but you don't really have to do anything. I successfully imported that material into the project. So anyway, hopefully you'll find some nice improvements, little bits of changes to the workflow, but not more complicated. We think it's actually changing the workflow, but simplifying it. So.
Yep. And then I had a question on, who sees key cards, and is that something that you can decide, like if a group sees key cards and a group doesn't see them, or, is that a channel by channel basis? If you could add a little clarity there.
Yep. So key cards are on a per channel basis. So if you're an editor, have editing privileges to a channel, any editor can decide to add these key cards to a channel. Once they're part of that channel, everybody who that channel's been shared with has those available to them. By default, they will see them if they're running 4.3 desktop. But as I was showing you, each user then has the option of turning them off or hiding those key cards if they don't want to see those. So you can push, and then we give the users the ability to turn them off if they think that it's encumbering their workflow. But by default, if you're an editor, and that data is still on the channel, it's just whether or not it's being displayed in the display layer through this control. But yes, you can do that on a per channel by channel basis, decide if they make sense in a channel, and then go set them up, and then everybody sees the same thing.
Steve, with my favorite comment yet, just to the tune of Daft Punk: search it, find it, load it, use it. So perfect.
We need to put some tunes into this.
Yeah. Right. So, and then just a little extra here, key cards, are key cards cross-channel? Are they specific to a channel? If I create a key card here, is that going to show up somewhere else?
Great question. So right now, the key cards that you do are universal. In other words, they're going to go company-wide per key value pair that you've assigned them to. So once you've assigned say those images to Revit category, every channel that you use Revit category, they're all going to automatically show up, which is great. You don't have to rework it, reset those up. You just basically choose the data you want and it drives it. There are circumstances obviously where you just want that to be limited to this channel and not have the same effect on another channel. So we're actually already working on some updates to this that are going to add another layer of control that's going to let you decide whether you want to adopt things, kind of globally, or create your own, think of it as like your own instance of it that's customizable that doesn't affect everybody else. So we're trying to really design these tools to conquer two things. You don't want to do redundant work. So if you want to set things up at some level and then let everybody take advantage of it, but then those that take advantage of it, if they decide they want to leverage that, but then customize it, they can basically get their own instance of it and it not affect everybody else. So we're really trying to approach this so that you can have the best of both worlds. Leverage things at a firm-wide level, have some standards that are pushed out, but then the minutia is you can customize it without affecting everybody else. So we're working through those, but there'll be some updates to this kind of moving forward. So.
And then just any other recommendations, suggestions for strategies on implementing key cards?
I think
any plans down the road to add AI suggestions for images?
Yeah. Both good questions. I think, as far as getting going, you can't break it, right? If you've already got channels set up, just go turn on some key cards and look at it and play around with the different data, and you can't break it. You can just delete them if you don't like them, and it's not going to mess up anything that you've got in production. So that's one thing. If you've got production data that everybody's using, just because you come in and turn on some key cards, unless you've updated everybody's machine with 4.3.1, it's not going to mess. They're not going to see any of that. Only if you've got the updated desktop will you see those, but that lets you kind of play around with those or create another channel and copy all your Revit content into that, and then just use that to play around with the different ways to look at the data and just get a feel for how it works. So I tend to be I learn by doing things. So it's like, the nice thing about this is you can go kind of play around with it, look at it, get a feel for how it works, get comfortable with it without fear that you're messing anything up that's in production. So that'd be my advice, is just to go play around with it. What I'm hoping is that you guys are going to start teaching us things that you're doing with specific kinds of data or ways of thinking about using it. And we always like that because it helps us learn and then hopefully pass that back to you, our customers, on best practices and things that we've seen working for people. And then the question about AI and automatically generating images, we've already done a little bit of work on automatically creating images like little grid thumbnails based on the content that's in the channel, just to give you kind of a visual quick, like here's a sampling basically of what's in this channel, which lets you kind of have a visual interface very quickly without having to do anything. As far as like AI, the stuff I did with Midjourney, if you're following what's going on that front, that stuff's getting very powerful. I definitely think that we're sitting in a nice position where you can imagine us tying in those kinds of like Dolly or a Midjourney to like, oh, you want to just search for a term and we'll pull up some images and you want to use that, go. I think most of our customers, especially the larger the firm, the more they maybe want to create their own brand standard. So creating like a PowerPoint template or a Google slide or whatever, InDesign, whatever you want to do, setting up some brand standards. Once you kind of set that template up, it's, now it's just a matter of maybe some of your own custom images in there, set that template up, push those images out. And I said, in an hour, you can have your own complete set of custom cards right on top of, say, your Revit categories and things like that. So very customizable.
think that's what we have in terms of questions right now.
All right. We'll give everybody about 15 or 20 seconds to start typing something else in if there's something else they want to catch us before we leave this. But yeah, thanks everybody for joining in. Like I said, it's available now. Download it, start using it. I think we've started to see, quite a good uptake of this. It's obviously a very visual and can be a very powerful tool in front of your content. So I think that accelerating adoption of it, that people want to start taking advantage of it. You'll find if you're relatively new to Avail, what you'll find is that as we rolling kind of develop these tools, we try to get them out in point releases. We're already working on Avail 5.0, which will be a major release sometime in the first half of next year. But we've also got several other features like we're talking about what we're doing with this Revit workflow that are going to be released just here, in the coming, weeks and months. So we kind of have rolling releases of these features. As soon as we feel like we've added enough value that you could take advantage of it, our goal is to get it out so that you can start leveraging it, take advantage of it, as opposed to like waiting till we've got 10 things and calling it some major big release or something. So a lot more kind of gradual releases. I think this one's worthy of taking a look at, just because I think it can positively affect the way your users are accessing and getting the content. Should make it much easier.
Yep, Rick. Yep, just to clarify with your question, he's just kind of like summarizing, making sure he's following correctly. Key cards, if you enable them on a channel, it's not going to enable them automatically on any other channel. It's on a channel by channel basis, but let's say you enable the same key on 2 different channels, those key cards will be shared. The images, the design and look that you've given those key cards will be shared across your channels.
Yep.
So hopefully that clears that up.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And you'll probably find that pleasing when you first start it, but then you'll run into situations where you're like, I don't want to actually inherit that. And that's why we're working on, we'll fast follow with some more advanced features that'll let you customize those. So first release out, they're kind of universal once you've set them up for a set of values and data, and then you decide which channels you want to apply that to. But the thing is, if you've taken the time to create custom images and then assign those, you don't want to redo it every time for every channel. The text stuff is easy. You saw it quickly. I could change the color and change the look or feel of that. You can do that in seconds or minutes. But it's the images and getting those assigned that's can be a little more laborious, tedious. So once you've done that, though, you inherit those, and then we're going to give you soon an ability to also customize those on a per channel basis if you want. So, all right, if that's it, we will call it an afternoon. Thanks everybody for joining us. Hopefully that gets you in the right mindset. Go get that downloaded, start playing. And after you've done some nice, interesting things, the team here loves, send it into Todd through the support desk and the team there. They like to share it with the team that's been building these. Let us know what you think about it. Show off the things that you've done. And we always love seeing it. Thanks for joining us.